Hello, everyone. It's very exciting to be here. It's the third day of a conference with a lot of exciting speakers, a lot of exciting ideas. I come from MIT, a D-Lab, and as the introduction mentioned, what I do is I work in the design, development, and dissemination of technologies that affect the lives of people living in poverty. We do these in several ways, and I will talk about that during the presentation. But first of all, I want to set the stage. We actually like doing things with our hands on. So I would like to invite you all to an interactive game. So first of all, look inside your pockets, inside your backpacks, or anything that you have with you, and pick one object. You have 10 minutes to do that, 10 seconds to do that. If possible, find something different than a pen or a phone, but if that's all you have, that's fine as well. Pick an exciting object. Cool. Do you have your object? Can everyone please put it up? Great. Now, I invite you to find 2 other people. So get into groups of 3. 4 are OK too. And this is the challenge. You will have just a few minutes to do this. Think of the object that you have, share it with the other people in your team, and think of an object that doesn't exist yet, that incorporates all of the 3 objects that you're holding. It can use either what the object is about, or it can be a new function. So think creatively. Think about something innovative. And if we have new people coming in, feel free to join one of the existing groups. Just bring an object with you. The question is, make an object that incorporates all 3 things that you're holding. Create something with all those 3 things. Be creative. I'm going to give you about another minute. So keep talking. Keep innovating. "20 seconds. Okay, everyone, can I get your attention? I know this is a fun game, but I actually now will invite some of you on stage. Who wants to come up here and share with the rest of the audience what they came up with? So come up here and in a quick 20, 30 seconds, tell us what the objects were and what your team created. Yes. A little bit louder, maybe?
Right, so I'm sorry, here's the mic.
So we had glasses, we had a notebook, we had token for free beer, and we had a mobile phone. And we thought a gaming platform, an e-learning gaming platform that uses virtual reality or augmented reality. Yeah,
Cool.
that's about it.
Very exciting.
And gamification, yeah, because of the free token.
Gamification
Free
with
token.
4 objects. That's fantastic. I think let's
Different idea.
some applause. Let's hear from team number 2.
Yeah, it is a passport, a key, a hat, and a cup of coffee, so it's quite easy. It's a hat that go around crossing countries and doors, and at some point you can unfold and drink a coffee, especially in the airports.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Can we have one more? Maybe one team from the back? Anyone want to share? Yes?
Yeah, we had an iPhone cable and a bicycle key and a little purse, and we made a hand-free tool to never lose anything again.
It's great. So a round of applause for everyone in partaking in this exercise of creativity. So why did I start off my presentation like this? I work in a lab at MIT that thinks a lot about creativity and innovation. And some may say that creativity and innovation are as old as humankind itself. We like to make progress by thinking up new ideas, by creatively solving problems. And that's a way forward with development as well. But how does creativity happen? Is it serendipity? Is it just in one instant when you come together and it comes in your mind? Or is it something that can be learned and something that can be taught and also practiced and exercised? At D-Lab, we think about this through design thinking. So design thinking is a set of tools, of approaches that help you think through the whole innovation and creative process. And it's a way to go from problems to solutions. We also think about technology a lot. So in development, the challenges are complex, the challenges are big, yet there is space increasingly, not just for traditional development approaches, not just for the traditional actors, which are NGOs, governments, but also of technology. How can you deploy and how can you utilize technology to solve some of these problems in terms of water, sanitation, energy, and really get to those that need solutions most. So there's this growing trend, this design revolution, to design for the other 90%. One statistic that I want to share with you is that about 90% of R&D dollars in the world today go towards designing products for 10% of the world. And there's this tendency to think about how can we flip or at least change some of that ratio. And part of this design revolution, which is designing for the other 90%, or other ways in which you may have heard of it, it's through terminology like human-centered design, or design for inclusiveness, design for extreme affordability. There's a lot out there that is thinking about bringing technology into solving these complex development problems. And what's also interesting is who the actors are. They're not necessarily just designers from design firms, but increasingly they're social entrepreneurs, they're engineers, they're universities, almost like the university that I work for, students, and people that are really crowding to this space. So, I want to talk to you a little bit about how this is happening and then how we are doing it differently. So I want to start with a story, and it's called A Story About Play Pump. How many people have heard about this technology before? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, so some of you, not so many. This is actually a technology, as you see, a merry-go-around. Many of you probably have played when you were young this and found it in your playgrounds. What this did is it took the same technology, it linked it up to boreholes in Africa, and the solution was that smiling children, there's lots of them in Africa, would get to play on the pump. They would pump water and solve the water problem, and then the water would go up on a tank and then be accessed by the community. This was a sensational story. Immediately, about $16 million from celebrities, from governments, they went into this technology. And there was a goal to install 4,000 of these all over in different villages in Africa. So it was quite a bit. It got a lot. One of my friends actually told me that this was, in his country, in Brazil, it's called the CNN effect. It was one technology that all of a sudden is going to solve this big problem. So then what happened? The walk-away test. You install these technologies in the fields. In the beginning, there's the smiling children, and then you ask, what happens 6 months after? What happens 1 year after you install the technology? In this case, the picture was not so exciting. No longer were you seeing the smiling children. You saw things like women, when the children were gone, the women were pushing these merry-go-rounds in the heat, trying to pump up the water. Sometimes they took them completely out. They pulled them out of the ground and reinstalled their old pumps. At other times, they actually put animals to make them go around because it was the only way to be able to pull enough water out of the ground. So what happened there? What is something we can learn from this very exciting story and then this also just as sensational failure? So what are some of the lessons? No pictures. Okay, it doesn't matter. So there's this idea that designing for needs automatically leads to success, but that's not the case. What is perhaps the strongest thing to think about this story is that the individuals that were supposed to benefit from this technology are the ones that actually were harmed by it the most. So in many villages, people were not consulted when this technology was built. They took out their old wells and put this back in. It turns out that the technology was complicated. If it broke down, no one in the village knew how to fix it. It was expensive, so these things really rusted. So definitely there's some engineering challenges to the story of this failure, but it's also a story of outsiders yet again coming in and solving solutions for communities that they believe are in need. So I have to say one thing is that everyone picks on this technology. It's not new. If you read about development, people have heard of it. It's easy. It got a lot of press afterwards that it was a big failure, even though millions of dollars were put into there. And I'm not here to pick on one particular technology or to say that doing these kind of interventions or doing technology for the developing world is something easy. In fact, it really isn't. And why is that? First of all, there's all these market inefficiencies. When you're talking about places like this in rural Africa, people are spread out. They usually don't have communication or transportation very accessible. So getting products there is quite difficult. The other thing is that the income of these individuals is rather small. When you're talking about having people that are making a few dollars a day, their liquid assets, how much money they have to spend on new products, is very, very tiny, and they're very risk-averse. So it's not easy to get life-saving products into these kinds of markets, even if you're doing it through the market and not through an NGO, which was the case of the play pump. But I guess the thing that I really want you to take away from the Play Pump story is that there's still this idea that we're pushing innovations in these communities. And then it's no surprise when then people abandon them and walk away or make them, use them for alternative sources. I mean, another one is bed nets, right? Everyone must have heard of mosquito nets that are given away in certain villages. You go back, and sometimes you find that they're used for catching fish, because people like to appropriate and be creative, as we saw in our first exercise. So I really want to revisit this idea of a design revolution and to think a little bit about shifting the paradigms. So good intentions aren't enough to create change at the local level. There's this sense in the 70s, so there have been movements in this space. The first is appropriate technology. So it's about getting technologies that are appropriate and work well in the local context. This isn't new, but the technologies, much like the Play Pump story, were coming from the outside. The second thing is inclusive development. That's also not new. Since the 80s and 90s, we started talking about involving individuals in the projects that, in the projects that will matter and change their lives. But what didn't change is when individuals were consulted. They were consulted in the beginning, maybe involved when the project was being designed, and then perhaps at the end when the project was being evaluated. How do we fill the gap? How do we make it all the way through in between? So I want to talk to you about thinking about a new radical way of moving forward, especially when it comes to technology design for the developing world. And this requires a shift in our thinking. So not to view people living in poor communities as vulnerable, rather to look at them as capable, really capable, creative individuals. And if we change the way that we think about this, then what happens? So the idea is that this space is not a sink when we put stuff in, but it's actually a well. When we draw creativity, when we draw technologies, we draw innovations, and we incorporate everyone in that process. So that brings me back to what I do, and it's design education. And now I'll tell you a little bit about how we do it. So the thing is shifting the paradigm, right? It's not about designing for individuals, but it's about designing with them in a very embedded long-term process, or actually designing by, so introducing people to design methodologies, to the skills, and then allowing them to come up with the technologies themselves. So the International Development Innovation Network. We sit at D-Lab. It's actually a consortium of universities that get together and we do a series of different kinds of programs. They mostly focus on taking the design curriculum that's often taught to engineers in these schools. They are maybe master's students, PhDs, and then taking it and making it accessible to people that don't necessarily presume literacy, that they might not have literacy skills, but then also change the methodology in a way that the second thing that we do is that we bring together diverse groups of people. Sometimes creativity is about bringing together very different disciplines, people from very different backgrounds, and then seeing what is sparked in that. So we focus on prototypes, not papers, though we are from an academic setting. We work both on the technologies, but also on the technologists, so the people that come up with this output, with these very simple, affordable designs. Empowering them is just as important to us as the outcome. And creative capacity building and co-creation. So we do this in 4 ways. One is design summits. These are immersive, month-long summits where we bring together about 50 different people from different walks of life. They go from the age of 18 to 80. Some have different kinds of sectoral backgrounds. Some are farmers, some are midwives, some are mechanics. And I'll share the story of some of these individuals. So we do these design summits. We do them all over the world. We've had about 10. Now we do about 3 or 4 every year. So we've got one in Colombia coming up around zero waste. We've got one in India around medical technologies, and one in Botswana around technologies for desert livelihoods. What happens after the summits? We try to create an ecosystem of support for the individuals that are trained there. And the other thing that we do is we do innovation centers, which are kind of like maker spaces, but with an impact kind of goal. And finally, we also do research in local innovation. So now I'll tell you the stories. How is it different if you follow this approach? Bernard is from Arusha. He is a bicycle mechanic. He actually worked in an orphanage because he really cared about giving back to his community. And so what he did was he got bikes and brought them in to work with children, and he fixed them. He came to one of our summits, and when he went back and learned the design process, he thought, hey, I know how to fix bikes. What can I make with bikes? So then he went back and he developed a bicycle-powered corn sheller that he used in his community. He developed a bicycle-powered hacksaw because he worked a lot with his hands. The next technology is that he did a bicycle-powered irrigation system. Now there's a lot of local organizations that are thinking about picking it up. And he also decided to make a blender using everything that was available on his local shop. So really simple materials. But then that has spurred a lot of like small juice bars in his community. So now Bernard has an innovation center, and he's teaching individuals to take and replicate the design process. This is Robert. He's a Zambian mechanic. He came to one of the design summits, and then he started thinking about some of the problems that face his community. And one of the ones that became really salient was the fact that his community depended on fishing in the Kafua River in Zambia. That's where it lives. A lot of the livelihoods are dependent on that. So he started thinking about what he could do to solve the problem that there's no electricity in the village. So fishermen would catch the fish, dry them, price goes down a lot, or they would buy huge blocks of ice and try to store the fish that way. Very expensive, very inefficient. So he built this with a small microgrant all by himself. What is it? It's an underwater dam-free turbine. So it powers generators by the side of the river where fishermen can store their fish. And it's creating a whole ecosystem, a new way of doing business in the village. Last story, Zubaida. She's an Indian engineer. As many of you may know, that the first 24 hours after birth are very difficult for women and children in the developing world. That is where most of the deaths happen, and it's usually due to very unhygienic birth conditions. So Zubaida, she was one that firsthand experienced this, and she was sick for about a year after the birth of her first child. So the technology that she developed is a clean birthing kit. It costs $2. It has all the essential things that you need for a clean birth. So it has a scalpel, something to disinfect your hands. It has gloves, and it also has a pad in which, if a woman is hemorrhaging, it will be able to actually tell an inexperienced midwife because of excessive blood flow from this pad. And it all costs $2. And now she sold it in India, and now she sold about 150,000 of them in 10 countries. And what's interesting about Zubaida is that innovation is not just in the product herself, but she is using interesting SMS texting to allow individuals to get training alongside the kits. And she's also using a franchise model. So these are made locally, and it allows women that wouldn't necessarily have employment to develop these kits. So this is kind of the maker model that we think about, is that we know we want to get life-saving technologies out there. And as many of you may have heard about maker culture during this conference, you might have thought about impact. So I invite you to think about impact in a different way. There's impact that comes from a product. You get a product out there, and it changes lives. And there's good stories of products that have come from the outside. So it's not about taking that approach away, but it's rather about introducing also a new way of thinking about impact that happens along the whole design process. What happens when individuals are empowered to think creatively, to be the creators of their own solutions, and then also involve their whole community in the sustainability and the upkeep of those products. So how do we think about designing that's beyond, it's with capabilities, increasing capabilities of individuals. So it's about social change that happens when people meet their potential. And I want to close with really one statement that Amy Smith, that's a founder of the program that I work for, she mentioned it, and she said that if we think about development and technologies design as more than 1 billion mouths to feed, but we think about it as 2 billion hands to engage, then what does that call to action look like? And what does that mean? How does that change? So thank you. I think I'm getting close to my time, yeah?
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much, Jona, but we still have a couple of minutes time for questions, if there are any. Please don't hesitate. So is that a project that you only employ in developing countries, or is that also an idea that you could use in cities in the US or here?
That's a very good question. I think that you can definitely use it everywhere, because I think that there's a tendency to think about these creative economies and how people can collaborate to the realities and the situations that they want to live in. So I think that it can go either way, though we primarily work in the developing world.
Okay. Now, questions.
My name is Barbara Gruber, Deutsche Welle Academy. Just a very short question. How do you select the people that participate in your design workshops?
So it's a really good question, and we've been thinking about that methodology quite a bit. We actually go for diversity, and also a way that we want to select people that have a tendency to work with their hands and care about community betterment. So these are really the two criteria, but we select them across all different sectors, so we're sector agnostic, and all different kinds of ages and fields. So, and the non-criteria is that you don't have to be like a design person before you come to the summit, but hopefully you take back some of those tools afterwards.
Hello, Ricardo. How can people or places or countries apply to host some of these events, these designing events?
Yeah. So that's one thing that I didn't really get into, but thank you, Ricardo, for asking the question. So there's two ways that individuals can get involved. If you're from a developed country, you can actually be a participant. There's a small amount of participants that come from developed countries. So we have about 3-4 every year, and we have a website, so you can send your application, say why you're passionate to work in this field, and then we select a group. And then usually we work in embedded with communities, so it's a month-long process. The ones that are coming up, as I mentioned, is India, Colombia, Botswana, also Pakistan, Uganda. It's a growing number. And then the second thing that you can do is you can actually apply to host one in your community. And we usually open up applications once a year around the March time. And so you can say what your idea for a design summit is. You can pick, for example, medical technologies, you can pick maternal health, you can pick waste and sanitation, and then we help support local groups to put together the design curriculum, facilitators, and also some seed funding.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Okay. Maybe two.
Kimon Haas, how do you follow up with the participants of the design workshops?
Yeah, so that's my job, actually. That's what I do in this whole process. I'm not an engineer or a designer myself, but I work as a network coordinator. We've got about 450 people that have been part of these workshops so far. And what I'm trying to do is create an ecosystem in which they can continue to move their project forward. And the ecosystem is one that's both online and offline, because a lot of the participants are ones that aren't traditionally connected to internet. So we employ some interesting SMS types of communications. We also are starting local chapters that are embedded in these communities, and we find local partners. And then we do a lot of the usual suspects, so give them technical support ongoing, financial resources, other opportunities for engagement. And then we track the projects moving forward. But the idea is that it's a not one-off capacity development and design event, but that it's inclusive and ongoing. And it's a network for life.
Okay, last question. Is it still? Yeah.
Hi, I just wondered how much you work with social scientists in terms of addressing social, political, economic impacts on how the technologies get taken up in the communities that you're working in.
It's a great question. So our focus, I would say, is mostly 80% we just work on hardware, right? So a lot of like stuff that can be introduced and by the local communities to the local community. So pedal-powered, different kinds of machinery, threshers, in all kinds of sectors, really. And we've been increasingly thinking about working with people in the social field. And we do this particularly through our research program. So the idea is we've been thinking a lot about local innovation and why it happens in some places and why it doesn't happen. A lot of the existing research on innovation actually is at the country level. So ecosystems you can build at the country level or at the firm level, right? There's so much literature out there about how to make your company more innovative. But there isn't really that much work on this. So we have introduced what we call a lean research approach, and we are building almost a consortium of researchers that are helping us look at both impacts, but also kind of outcomes at the local level. And so hopefully we will know how to do this better and know how to engage individuals better.
Okay. Thank you again, Jona. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are we ready for the next? No? So